If you are opening to your handout page, you will see on page 6 there is something called the informative speech description. And let's read through that together. This will be, in essence, your prompt for the informative speech. So the speech of information should give the audience knowledge about a subject that most of them do not have or need to know more about. Your speech should seek to teach your classmates something mature, worthwhile, and worthwhile of their time. There should be an and there. Let's talk about that real quick. So mature and worthwhile of their time. All of you have so many interests and things that you are doing in your outside life. You have talked about some of these fantastic things, hobbies, clubs, organizations, places where you come from, all within your introduction and your photograph speeches. Feel free to reflect on some of those magical characteristics and traits and travels that you all have, hobbies, and use those for your informative speech. If you touched on outrigging, right? You touched on the idea of it in Hawaii, you can always just parlay that into an informative speech about the apparatus itself, about the history of it. We'll see how it goes, right? And so, yeah.
If we want to do a speech about something that's controversial, is that bad?
No. Why? Why do you think it would be bad?
I just want to know.
Well, I know. Why do you think it would be bad? That's my question.
You wouldn't allow it.
Oh, interesting that that's your bad description. I won't allow it. Yeah, absolutely talk about something controversial. Right? Why wouldn't we talk about something controversial? Because if we don't talk about those things, then what? Well, how would we ever know about it, right? And the idea of talking about something controversial is fine, but remember, this is an informative speech. So, if you're thinking, and we'll talk about this in your purpose, the ideas that we are going to be talking about will simply be informative. But if you are already thinking about a persuasive idea, like you want to tell us that something is good or bad or right or wrong, or that we should do something or something should happen or something should be changed, those are persuasive speeches. If you want me to believe a fact or believe a truth, those are persuasive speeches. An informative speech is simply the who, what, when, where, how, sometimes the why. Right? Think of yourself as an ethical journalist who is simply seeking to reiterate what truths have already been established in the world around us. So if you wanted to do a controversial topic for persuasion and you know where you're already going, consider for your informative speech doing the same thing for within the same topic area and simply change the purpose for the persuasion. So for example, can I use your example? Like, would you have an idea in your head?
No, yeah.
Okay, for example, if I wanted to talk about hard in the, if I wanted to talk about sexual assault, right? I could perchance tell you about sexual assault on college campuses. There's factual information there. The research has been done for years. Today I'm going to inform you about sexual assault on campus by talking about some causes of this assault continuously occurring and then what the effects of that assault are. Cause, effect, solely informative, right? Because we know what things individuals do, and then we know how it affects individuals on campus. And then, for the purpose of persuasion, to persuade my audience that the Title IX subtopic G needs to be changed, meaning like how colleges, or maybe how colleges respond to sexual assault, or having more education on campus for sexual assault, or perchance reducing hypermasculinity within the Greek system, right? There's so many different avenues that you can go in regards to that topic. So feel free to kind of parlay one into the other. Does that make sense to you? Okay, cool. In this assignment, you're expected to follow a particular pattern of organization for your chosen topic. And y'all, how exciting. It's chronological, spatial, topical. You can also do cause and effect. We'll talk about all of those today, so don't worry, you will figure out what that means, and those are going to help you develop your thesis statement for your homework and also that thing that drives your entire speech. Particular emphasis will be placed on choosing a variety of supporting materials that will clarify your subject and hold the interest of your particular audience. Then, where we go next is you're going to need to conduct research for this one. Yeah, so that you can be persuasive. But Amanda, it's an informative speech. Remember, rhetoric, the purpose is going to be informative, but the material that you develop within, your examples, your statistics, your testimonies, the content, will of course need to be factual, will need to be descriptive. We can utilize experts outside of ourselves so that the words can not only come to life, but potentially boost our own credibility. Oh, look how much work I've done and the research I've done to present you with this idea. Right? So we will do research, and that's why we're going to the library on next Tuesday. At the library, we will be able to start to explore these amazing things that they have. They are called databases. That's what they'll call them. Has anybody been to the library before on these orientations? Amazing! Let's reinforce that idea one more time for all the cheap seats, right? In your library, sure, we have books. That's what we are most familiar, I believe, with libraries. But nowadays, you don't even need to go into the library if you don't have to. Why? Because we have so many ways to digitally access the materials that are necessary to create an excellent research position, an informative speech, etc. All the information we need. Where do we get them? Well, there are these things called databases. And these databases are essentially houses, if you will. I like to think of them as little houses for outside materials, such as journals, and magazines, and newspapers, and TV shows, and recordings. And it's all these articles that are housed in different databases. Each database serves a different purpose. The database may be a communication database, whereby the journals, magazines, news, TVs, and recordings will be grounded in concepts of communication studies, also theories of communication studies, journals that are designated for that discipline. Each of you have disciplines of your own that you are going into, whether you're going to do medicine or engineering or you're going to do nursing. They have your own little house of database right here that has all that information in there. So if you're ever writing a paper on something that is historical, they have like a history database that you could go to and you can examine. So these databases are incredibly helpful because you will learn how to access them for not only an exorbitant amount of materials, but also how to narrow your focus so that you get a better grasp or handful, if you will, of information rather than simply searching Google and coming up with a gajillion answers and having to sort through that. The librarians will help you to narrow your focus and narrow your searches. And then also, they're going to show you how to ensure that the information that you are extracting from these particular databases is credible, and it's reliable, and it's been verified as being truthful. Does that make sense? So, we will do that, which is very exciting. So you're going to be conducting research, and you're going to be required to find 3 outside sources for your speech. That means that you will be looking at, does it say 3 in there?
Yeah.
Okay, good, 3. You will learn a little bit about this radar standard inside the class on Tuesday. I will talk about that in the library, and then this tells you a lot about the other different sources that you can use if you want to continue to look on that page. But really anything can work. We have so many resources now. It's a proliferation of information. So magazines, newspapers, journals, TV shows, books, documentaries, personal interviews, a pamphlet that you got at your job. Where all these, you can interview somebody of whom has experienced a firsthand account. All of these can be used. The research that you have must be cited out loud in your speech, and we're going to talk about how to do that. It then must be cited parenthetically in your outline. And if that doesn't make any sense right now, don't worry. We're going to talk about parenthetical representation and how to cite a source inside of a work. So inside your writing or inside your outline in this case. And then also it must be written or referenced in a works cited page. So you'll have it done in 3 different ways, and we'll teach you how to do that. Not only how to say it out loud for your audience, because they don't have paper in front of them, then how to cite it inside, and then how to cite it in your works cited page. So hopefully that will get you going, and I think it's a good resource and knowledge to have for the rest of your collegiate career. Also, you will be expected to follow the basic principles of good delivery and try to exclude those vocalized pauses. Utilize your face, your gestures, the movement in the class. And the final thing, you will need a visual aid to aid in the development. You're only required to have 1, but you can have up to how many? Do y'all remember? Starts with an N, ends with an I.
9.
Oh, good, yeah, 9. Okay, great. Remember, you don't want 500 different ones, but if you were scrolling through pictures or something, it would work. I am going to be going over the selection of topic, but you can, so that's really only the first 2 paragraphs of this. We have the next 3 paragraphs to go of the things that we'll be doing up until the time that you deliver this speech for the writing process of it. So if you have any questions over time, of course, always refer back to the prompt, or you can ask me. But on page 7, if you turn to that, you will see that that is the informative speech checklist. So if you ever forget, what do I need to have that day? What does it do? What do I need to bring? How do I need to bring it? It's all right there. And then the last thing that you have on page 8 is your evaluation sheet. And that's the one that you'll tear out and bring into me attached to your, this time you'll have a preparation outline that you'll be presenting. Sound good? Does that make sense to everybody? Yay! Yes.
What kind of time frame are we looking at?
5 to 7 minutes. If you want to write that down, it's a 5 to 7 minute speech. 5 to 7 minutes. Almost all of you have already talked for 5 minutes about yourself, so don't worry. And if I want to hear about a big topic, that's the thing, though. 5 to 7 minutes. It's not that much time at all. Especially if I want to take on the world of steel water bottles. In 5 minutes? Oh my gosh. And so if we start to think about that, you start to think about these dynamic speeches or these dynamic topics, remember, it's 5 to 7 minutes. Your job is going to be to put your finger in the conversation. This isn't something that you're going to take on the entirety of, but just a small aspect that would be important for us to come to understand and know. Does that make sense to y'all? So let's churn butter and then turn to page 21. Page 21 in your packet. And I'll start to talk a little bit about ways to brainstorm about, about a topic. As you'll see here, the informative speech, it requires that you organize your main points in specific ways. But before we even get into the idea of organizing main points, we must take a step back, because we don't yet have a topic now, do we? No! And you may in your head, but let's just, for the sake of it all, pretend that we don't necessarily have one, and let's start to brainstorm a little bit about how to develop those particular topics. How to start generating them. Informative speeches fall under particular categories. So your informative speech can be about any of the following things, or fall within any of the following areas. Those areas are people, places, events, concepts, phenomena, and thank you, objects. Perfect. People, places, events, concepts, phenomena, and objects. A great way to start any brainstorming process is to simply look at these particular categories and start to think, what do I know a lot about? I would love for each of you I encourage each of you to understand that usually there's two ways that you can do a speech. You can do something that you know a lot about or something that you want to learn more about. In the case of this class, you are at the basics of understanding the two fundamental strengths of public speaking, which are organization and delivery. You've seen how it's really reinforcing that idea of understanding how to create a clear, concise, and effective message whereby not only you, but also the receiver has the shared meaning and understanding, but also that we start to practice our delivery so that nothing gets in the way of that content that we've worked so hard writing. Therefore, if it is simply about the principles of organization and delivery, I encourage each of you to speak about something you already know about. It'll make it easier on you, one, because you already know a lot about it. Two, the other thing is that you are going to be more excited to talk about that topic. And when you're more excited, what are we? Yeah, absolutely. More excited, more interested, more engaged. And then the last thing is you'll be more interested to actually research it, right? It's fun to research things that you're interested in. Like, oh yeah, I could look this up. I don't want to look up a journal article on headaches, right? That just doesn't sound fun to me. But I have to do it because it's part of my anatomy class, whatever. But in this case, we get to choose something fun that you already like. So feel free to take on either of those challenges of doing something that you want to learn more about. You can if you have the time to do so. But understand that this is about getting your experience with public speaking, right? So keep that in mind as we go forward. Let's, though, look at the different types of informative speaking categories. And I encourage each of you to go through and simply start thinking about things that you know or things that you would like to know about and start listing them. But let me start to give you an idea about what each of these categories represents and what it means. And in turn, hopefully, that will allow you to maybe brainstorm a little, and I can give you some ideas that people have done before. So people, what includes anybody, any person or a group. You can think of it like a team or a band, a writer, an author, a poet, a papa, an author, a writer, a poet, a musician that you absolutely love. Perchance there's a dancer that you are interested in. And maybe there is an actor of whom you admire. Perchance there is a famous political individual that you would like to highlight. Maybe some of you have an individual who has been an influential member of your culture or society that you may want to bring forward. So inform us about that. There's a lot of different ways that you can go with this. And we know that individually people, they have a grand history and a large perspective. So I will talk to you about how to narrow that. Or if we were going to talk about the Rolling Stones, that's a lot of information and they've had a long career. So how do we start to narrow that down a bit? And we'll talk about it. But feel free to think about those people that you love or the individual teams that you love or groups that you love or individuals of political influence, social influence, movers and shakers of the world. Although this speech, I would love to hear about your personal family and friends, that's what those other two speeches were for, the informative and the persuasive. So ideally here, we want to get you talking about things outside of yourself. If you've had a personal experience with it, absolutely great. Talk to me about what you did when you traveled there, or how your experience was going through this whatever that you're talking about. But for the purpose of, we don't want to be to inform you about my grandpa or my dog. Sound good? Okay, good. So people. The other thing that you can do are places. So places are anywhere, anything, like a location that is worth speaking about. So think about places in a large scope and then also even a small scope. We can talk about particular countries or cities within countries, perchance that you've traveled to. Anybody have a dream vacation that they've always wanted to go on? That may be something that you can speak about. I had a student once who was from Singapore, and she did her speech on Singapore. And what she did is she pretended like she was a flight attendant, and she talked to us all like we were landing in Singapore. Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin on our descent to Singapore, I'd like to welcome you all. But as a native, I would like to also give you a couple hints and fun things to do on your time here. Right? So that was a cool way to do it. However, you can also start to narrow down that focus. So if I was going to talk about, per se, France, and then I narrowed it down to maybe Paris, and then I could even narrow it down to either like the northern region or the southern part of Paris, right? Because in those particular places, there's also a ton of things to do. So start thinking about those places that maybe you've been to or that you would love to go to, or perchance that you've just always dreamed about. The other thing that you can do is you can start to even think of it on a smaller scale. So places are also things that we have around here. Santa Monica College, what? The Santa Monica Pier, the Getty Center. Any other museum that you would like to talk about, right? A particular state beach that you maybe go to. If we're talking about a place that you go, Kings River? Kings Canyon, right? So Kings Canyon. You could absolutely talk about places that you've been before. There's a lot of different historic places that you could speak about. So consider those. Think about places that you've been before, interesting, exciting, that you continuously want to go back to. That may be something to tell us as your audience about. The other thing that you can do is events. So anything that has happened, is happening, or perchance may happen that may be notable for your audience. So something that has happened, you can talk about a past event if you would like to, something historical, something that happened. So like you can take on large challenges. Today I'll inform you about the Civil War, the Tet Offensive. Right? We can talk about specific things that have happened, or you can also talk about things that, if we wanted to like narrow those particular focuses of events that have happened, you can talk about specific parts of maybe that war, maybe a specific battle that you would like to talk about in particular. Or maybe if we were talking about the event, like we could instead talk, or like the Civil War, if you're talking about something like that, you could talk about instead narrowing it down to what led up to the Civil War, right? Instead of talking about the entire thing. Maybe like what led up to it, or perchance, like what led up to it. Maybe we could go. The other thing you can do is talk about things that are happening. So what's happening right now? Is there an event that's happening right now or going on? But that also ties into this idea of the future. So are you involved in any type of fun, on-campus, off-campus groups? Do those groups have any types of events that occur either annually or semi-annually that you may want to talk about? So something like if you wanted to talk, or I had a student one time who went to I don't know, what was it? I don't know what type of school it was, but it was, so let's just say that you go to a French school, for example, and your school has a big fair every year. This fair was worthy of talking about because this fair brought in over like 50,000 members of the community as a part of it. And so it really developed and it grew into understanding this cultural aspect of these individuals. And so that may be something worthwhile to talk about. But then also think about all those events you go to. Like some of you like cars in here, so maybe like, do you ever like do a drag race or the Indy 500, or do you want to talk about something like that? Is there a particular event like the major, like the baseball all-star game or a Super Bowl that you wanted to talk about? Is there something that you do musically? Do you go to Coachella or Burning Man, or do you go to like the Electric Daisy Carnival? I always want to say festival. So those would even be fun events for you to talk about. So think about those places that you've been, those events, and see if you can maybe talk to one of us about those. Then we have the idea of concepts. Concepts relate to theories. So typically all of us will have some kind of academia that we are studying right now. You are maybe involved in other classes. So for example, if you're in a psychology class right now and you were learning about a particular theory and you wanted to bring that into the class, like perchance cognitive dissonance theory, these would be great topics for those of you who are going into like the sciences or medicines. Can I start to talk about something within my discipline, this theory? Do I understand it? How can I relate it to an audience? It may give you a great opportunity to try that. Does that make sense to y'all? So if you're studying biology, is there a theory from biology you'd like to bring into us? Early childhood education, what's a thought about that? Yeah?
Isn't a theory like a phenomenon?
A phenomenon would be something like black holes.
Isn't that like a theory?
Yeah, it's just how they divide the two. These typically concepts and phenomena can go together if it's something that is within the, so if you see here, like on page 22, so it addresses abstract complex theories or ideas or beliefs. So this idea of a concept, so if there is an idea out there, maybe and I'm trying to even think of the word idea, because it's hard to get into the idea and beliefs without it being persuasive, and that's why we stick mostly with theoretical foundations, whereby the phenomena addresses natural, so something that's happening in the world around us, or supernatural, what? Area 51 speech. See the excitement? Oh, good. Right? Or universal occurrences. So a black hole, a shooting star, earthquakes. I'm going to inform you about tsunamis, typhoons, the Bermuda Triangle. Does this make sense to y'all? Yeah, cool. The last thing is an object. An object, remember, anything that's tangible, usually that we can touch, it's this physical object. Animals will fall underneath this area as well. If we're talking about objects, we can think about all of those things that we touch every day that bring joy to our life and happiness, that we utilize, that maybe help us get by during the day. I'm going to inform you about a particular app. I'm going to inform you about a particular technological device. Maybe I do, in fact, have a car that I love so much that I want to inform you all about. Or not your car, that is. The brand of the car would work, right? Or you could talk about, I had a student one time who was very much into shoes. And so this object was, it was over at LMU, he was an entrepreneurial student, and he did his on the shoe that he was designing within that. But you could talk about like the Jordans. They've been around for so long, probably for a reason, other than just the name. But what does it do? What's that object? Maybe you could talk to us about that. Does that make sense to y'all? So any type of object that, your skateboard, your electric scooter, your whatever, like you can start, and not yours again per se, but if you have those particular objects that you love, perchance telling us about them, their history, how they've come to develop, maybe what their uses are. So you can look at it and explore it in a lot of different ways. Does that make sense? Did this give you all a couple more ideas or generate some ideas for you? Oh, good! Is anybody like, oh, I still have no clue, Amanda? And when I say animals, I really do mean animals. I had a student who had a gecko, but he did his speech on geckos, and it was so much fun. I was like, geckos? And then I was like, wow, these things are cool! I would have never known. I would have never looked into it, but he brought it to life and made it happen. So you can think about animals in that way as well. Now, once we've established our topic, our key will be to start narrowing our focus down. I'm going to start off by writing out a little bit of your homework activities so that you know exactly what to write. So if you wanted to go ahead and write this down with me, you can. But every single speech is going to start with something we call the general purpose. The general purpose, if we think about it, and if I draw this handy triangle to assist you, By the time we get down here, we will hopefully have what we like to call our thesis. But right now, we are starting off with the most general purpose of this speech. Not in specific, but in general. Every speech that you ever give in your life will fall under 3 categories. And understanding what category yours falls under will be very important. They are to persuade, to entertain, and guess what? To? Yes, everybody! Are you ready for this? For your homework, you are going to write down 2 words. To inform. Do not write down any more words than this. So many people like to write down more. Don't. That's it. Just write down to inform. Did you do it?
Yeah.
Good. Then you're already done with step 1 of your homework. Yay! So that is the most broad purpose. We know that with every move that we make, we are speaking for the purpose to, there we go. Now, friends, this is the most important step. Are we ready? It is called the specific purpose. You may also know this as your central idea. It is specifically what you will inform us about. But if we are going to get specific, we need to really nail in that focus, right? And how do we nail in that focus? What? That's good. Now that's how you really get people to remember it. That's for darn sure. Keep them on track. So good. But how do we start to narrow our focus? How do you start to find out a smaller idea of what you can talk about?
Details.
Yeah. How do you find details? What do you have to do? Wait, say it! Say it again! Research. This is the pickle. People will oftentimes forget this idea of researching before they write their topic. Because you don't know quite yet maybe all of the options that you have to talk about. Or maybe the different subtopics that are a part of your main topic. And so a good idea is to simply even read. Yeah, but I don't want you to go and read like a journal article. That makes no sense. Mostly because journal articles also, for the purpose of this class, aren't going to work very well. Plus, it's a beginning class, and that's a lot of reading in a technical way that may not be of interest to you, and may discourage you from continuing that reading. So we will try to maybe attempt a journal article for persuasion, but for this speech, you can keep it easy. And also start to develop that research. So where do we just start a basic research? If you were to look up one topic and you wanted to find out a good overview of it, where, and if you weren't saying, pretend we're not in a classroom, what would you say?
Wikipedia.
Yes, good! And Wikipedia is a great place to start, okay? It doesn't mean that you're going to go off and use every single thing, that you're going to cite all these sources, but it's an easy overview of a topic. And it's a great way for you to simply start seeing some of the categories or other places within your topic that you could talk about. So I encourage each of you that if you're debating between some ideas to start to examine that Wikipedia page or do at least a little bit of pre-research before you narrow your focus, because it does need to be narrowed down once you come up with that narrowed focus. So like we said before, if I'm going to talk about the Lakers, even if if I was talking about basketball, that's crazy town because that could be an entire semester. And then if I wanted to get it down to the Lakers, is that still going to be a lot to do in 5 to 7 minutes? Yes, good. I'm glad that we're all nodding our heads. So there's some different ways we could go with this then. What are different elements of these Lakers that we could talk about? We could talk about we could talk about a particular player from the Lakers. We could talk about a specific season of the Lakers that was memorable. We could talk about a specific championship game of the Lakers that we wanted to. So you can narrow this down, or you could even talk about like the coach coach's career. I don't know if you wanted to do something like that. Now, each of these are, of course, now maybe not even a team. And we have to start to think about that. Because if I'm talking about a player, okay, and if I'm talking about this, okay, and if I'm talking about a championship team, okay, but maybe that championship is now an event. And it depends on how I'm going to write the specific purpose to tell us what type of category we are falling into. Does that make sense to y'all? Okay, great. So we can also talk about, perchance, like the coach's career. That could be over a specific period of time, but it's not a team, it's an individual. And so it goes back to a specific person too. So try to work on that focus and that narrowing as you go forward. So how will that be written? Well, y'all, you're going to do it like some math. You ready to write this next part? Okay, feel free to write this down. You're going to bring this here. You're going to say to inform, just build on top of it, my audience about blank. Here is your narrowed topic. And that is what you will provide. Does everybody understand how to write the second part, the specific purpose, for your homework? And how this is going to be your central idea, that unifying element that runs throughout all your speech. Now we know that we're informing, sure, but now we're specifically informing you about this. So when you're talking about your supporting materials, you're talking about your examples, you're choosing your statistics, it is going to be to help make sense, guide who, what, when, where, why to your audience. Yeah?
So, are we going to have a thesis as well? Or
Yeah.
That is no?
We will.
Okay.
Because what are we missing to have a thesis? We have our central idea, and now you're going to need, because the thesis is a combination of your central idea to get to know me better, and your how, which are your main points. That's right, to get to know me better. Tell you about my job, my family, and what I do on weekends. Show you how this signifies happiness. Tell you about who was there and where we're going, right? So we have to get to that thesis portion. Now remember, in this specific purpose, in order to keep this informative, the words that you don't want to have are good, bad, right, wrong, moral, immoral, just, unjust, should not. Those are persuasive terms. Now once you put it in here, your speech purpose, although it says inform, it's not. The other thing is to make sure that this specific purpose is one statement. Not to tell us about the history and the that would make sense. Hold on. I'm trying to think of like something that somebody's done. It's like to inform my audience about ballet's influence in France and America, I will describe to you. You have now taken on way too much to do. Does that make sense? So make sure that you're only that this specific purpose is one narrowed individual idea. Then, friends, you are now ready to move on to the thesis statement. However, now we can look back at the paper, because for your thesis, we know that you are going to need your central idea. So everybody, all you're going to do is just like I said with the math, bring it down. Did you write that down?
Yeah.
Now there, you're going to write it down again. Are you ready? Same thing as above. To inform my audience about, and you're going to put your narrow topic. I will describe, and because this speech is now 5 to 7 minutes in length, that means our main points can also grow. Now we have time to talk about more than 2 to 3 main points, if so you choose. So for this speech and the persuasive, you can have between 2 to 5 main points. So I will describe blank and blank. But how do we get our blank and our blank? Well, that's when we get to talking about this idea of a pattern of organization. And so like it says here, develop, depending on what category your topic falls in, depends upon how you organize your main points. Now, what is this? A hoop to jump through, Amanda? What? No, my friends. Researchers have been studying for years how audiences best receive information depending upon what category they have. And I'll show you how this is true and how it's come to be true. So the first type of pattern of organization that you have there on page 21 is this idea of chronological organization. So chronological organization. Are y'all on looking at the chronological organization? Okay, fantastic. If you have a person or a group, a team, something like that, a concept, or an event. So underneath it, it says chronological. You have an A, B, C. People, events, concepts are organized chronologically. People, events, concepts are all organized chronologically. What does chronological mean by time? From beginning to end, right? Have you ever seen the movie Memento? You ever seen the movie Pulp Fiction? Okay, good. People in 1995 either loved that movie or they hated that movie. It was very different from other movies that had been out before. Because chronologically, our brains make sense of chronological time. Since you were little, you've been learning chronological time. Think about your history class. It doesn't talk to you about the end of the war, and then talk to you about the beginning of the war, and then talk to you about the middle of the war. It wouldn't make any sense, because you wouldn't have context of how you got from one place to the other. There'd be new characters introduced, and you're like, wait a minute, I don't know, where'd they come from? How'd they get here? So if you ever watch the History Channel, if you ever watch a biography show, if you're ever listening even to an audiobook of an autobiography, you are hearing individuals talk about the beginning, what happened, then the middle, then the end. So if we're talking about an individual's life, and I heard somebody say Kobe Bryant earlier. Kobe Bryant is a fine topic to take on, but that guy's got a lot going on to talk about in 5 to 7 minutes. And so you could then narrow your focus to the basketball career of Kobe Bryant. And now, okay, at least I know I'm not going to be talking about like his philanthropies or any of the outside scandals or anything like that. I'm simply talking to you about his basketball career. Does that make sense to y'all? And so then, if we start to think about it, we can talk about maybe the different shifts of his basketball career. So your first main point could be to potentially, to inform my audience about the basketball career of Kobe Bryant, I'll first talk to you about his career in high school. Then I'll talk to you about his time with the Lakers with Shaquille O'Neal. And then I'll tell you about his time with the Lakers after Shaquille O'Neal, when he was like the Lone Star, something like that. right? And then within each of those points, I can talk about all the things that he did, his specific talents or attributes that were going on, what were maybe amazing contributions to that particular time period that he participated in. The only thing you don't want to do when you have an individual who's a sports player is give a main point on statistics. That's a lot of information. And it will be fine to sprinkle statistics into other main points, but an entire main point that simply lays out like awards and statistics, it's not very effective, and it's a lot of grouped numbers and information to get at once. That doesn't have a lot of purpose there. The other thing is event. So for example, if I wanted to talk about the events of 9/11, that's pretty broad as well. So maybe I simply want to talk about the 9/11 events or the 9/11 attacks on the Twin Towers specifically. And so I can start by saying, what happened before the attacks, what happened during the first hit of the tower, what happened when the second tower, and then maybe even the rebirth of the Freedom Towers. So now it's taking us on a chronological order. The other thing is a concept. So if we start to think about concepts, or if you start to think about Buddhism, Dadaism, I want to talk about a particular practice in yoga, that could be a concept. A particular dance, that could be a concept. What you could do is you could describe to us how it came about or how the theory was developed. Then you could talk about how it was utilized in society and potentially maybe where it's going in the future or how it's going to be used now. Does that make sense? You could talk about when it began, when it came to the United States, how it's developed, where it's going. So taking us on this chronological journey. When you were given books when you were little, you read those books and it was girl walks through forest, then she falls asleep, then she meets Prince Charming, they live happily ever after. It's always this idea of a start and an end. And that's another story as well. So if you have people, events, concepts, you're going to organize everybody? Which means in order of? Fantastic. Now, the next one. If you have a place or an object, you are going to organize your main points spatially. So on there, you have the word spatially, I think, right? There we go, spatially. So what does spatially mean? It means in a pattern of direction. How many of you have ever been to Disneyland? Fantastic! And if you haven't been to Disneyland, it's okay. Think about any theme park or maybe museum that you've been to. The second that you walk up and you pay for those tickets, they not only hand you the tickets, but they also hand you a what? A map! Because they don't want you to get lost. Because if you get lost at Disneyland, how's your experience? Bad. When you don't have good signage, it's where am I? What am I doing? Oh, goodness, I missed the parade. Why did nobody tell me? It's their fault. So they try to prevent that with these crazy things called maps, right? You go into a mall and you don't know where to go. What do you look at? So this is a great way to organize your main points. For example, if I was going to say, to inform my audience about Disneyland, I can take you on an adventure because I can break up Disneyland by space directional pattern. So I could think about the space of Disneyland, and I could make my main points in accordance with them. Meaning, to inform my audience about Disneyland, today I will just take you on a tour through the park describing first a stop on Main Street. Then we'll move on over to Adventureland, or to Tomorrowland. Then we'll move on up to Toontown and Fantasyland. And finally, we will end our adventure with adventures in Adventureland and Frontierland. So that's how you could break that down. I had a student one time who was talking to me about the Las Vegas Strip. Right? So they talked about the north part of the Strip. And by the way, I don't know if this is correct on my part. Today I'm going to to take you on a journey through the Las Vegas Strip by starting at the top of the Strip in the northern, then we're going to talk about the middle part of the Strip, and finally we'll talk to you about the south of the Strip. And so within each of these main points, this individual could utilize the same ideas to divide and separate. So let's say, for example, in the north part, they would talk about some hotels you can go to, some of the most famous restaurants, and some of the most famous clubs. And in the next one, guess what they're going to do? Hotels, restaurants, and clubs, right? And the last one, the same thing. Now, are they going to talk about every single hotel, every restaurant, every club? No, it's way too much, right? So maybe they'll talk about the highlight, 2 from each, or 1 highlight from each if they wanted to, or 2 highlights. That would probably be better. That will give us some ideas. Same thing. So like Eiffel Tower. Here, I'm going to tell you about the top, middle, and bottom if you wanted to. Yeah?
What if you had an object like a bicycle? How would you?
Okay, oh good. So that's what my one student did, and you're more than welcome to do the same idea like that. So if you did have a bicycle, or for example, that student who did the shoe, right?
Right.
So what did they do? Today I'm going to inform you about this shoe by talking about the exterior of the shoe, then talking about the interior of the shoe, and finally talking about the sole of the shoe. And so that's how the individual described it. And that's a great way to go through and talk about each of the facets or aspects of it. The same thing could happen with a bicycle if you wanted. Clearly. What? Oh my gosh. It's not so bad. Okay. But you could be like, okay, so I'm going to talk, if there's specific features that you'd like to point out. Like this is what makes this interesting. Fantastic. You can do that.
But you can't, you could do like the history, it doesn't have to be. Wait.
Thank you for moving me on to that next one. Fantastic. Y'all. Now the last type of organizational pattern is what?
Oh.
Topical. Topical organization means organized by topic. Which ones can be used are all of them. So if you have a person, a place, a thing, an object, an event, a concept, you can use topical organization. But it is not a catch-all, and that's the biggest thing. You don't want it to be this big grab bag of information. You don't want it to be a grab bag of random topics, because that can oftentimes become too broad. And that's why these chronological and spatial may be more effective. But I love what you're talking about here. You can talk about, in that case, who, designed it, what's its like purpose or like for, and then aspects that make it different from others, right? I could also talk to you about Disneyland. To inform my audience about Disneyland, I will tell you a little bit about the characters you can see there, the rides you can go on, the restaurants, and finally, some hidden features. And all of those, regardless of spatial organization, now you get to just simply talk about the specific topics. Now you can still talk about those topics in spatial formation if you wanted to, as your particular subpoints, but that's up to you. So you can talk about a person. So let's say I'm talking about Kobe Bryant, and now I do want to include something else. And I say, so today to tell you about Kobe Bryant, I'll tell you a little bit about his basketball career, tell you a little bit about his philanthropies, and I'll finally tell you some of the scandals that he's been involved in. Salacious. Does this make sense, this topical organization? So there's also a great tip that I would like to give you in regards to your main point development. And that goes back to our friendly thing called Wikipedia. So, if I for example, wanted to talk to you about, oh, look at those. Yes, the notorious B.I.G. Of course I want to talk about you. Let's say I want to inform you about Biggie Smalls, the notorious B.I.G. Influential character in hip-hop and rap today. I can, of course, read through my Wikipedia, but what does every Wikipedia entry have? A table of content. And so I can and be like, for example, today I'm going to inform you about the life and career of Biggie Smalls by describing his early life, his ready to die, right? So you could even do it by year, by describing 1972 to 1994. And then talking, or I could do even just his career. I'll talk to you about his musical career by highlighting his main albums. Starting with the 1994 album, his 1995 albums, his 1996 album, and lastly his 1997 albums, right? So I could do something like that. I could also do it topically by talking about his career, his early life, his career, and his death and funeral, right? So I could do it that way. I could also do it simply like with a legacy. What is the legacy of Biggie Smalls, right? How has he influenced other individuals? So I could talk about like the legacy of him. What are the outstanding messages he's left with the hip-hop community? Who has been building on top of his work, and how has that been different, right? So we can do it in a bunch of different ways. If you also wanted to think about places even. Oh, look, over here. I can click on New York. Huh? What? Yay! I want to tell you about the history of New York. Maybe I want to tell you about some fun places to visit. I want to talk to you about, I don't know, the parks in New York, the historic landmarks, right? So I can do this as a map. I could take you on a walking tour of New York City, or perchance I could take you on a walking tour just of Central Park. Oh, that would be fun, right? But the great part about this Wikipedia is that they do have these options for each of you to see maybe some ways not only to get an understanding, that holistic understanding, but also to get some ways of starting to look at. What? Oh, I pushed the wrong one. Not the audio here. But you can also get generate some ideas of how to narrow your focus, and then ways to narrow that, ways to explain that narrow focus. Does that make sense to y'all? So do you all think that you're ready to go forth over the next day and a half? You start to generate ideas. And then when are you going to post these assignments? The 7th at 11:59 p.m. And then I'm going to go back in and I'll send you an email that says, hey, you, check it out. And then you're going to go back in and check it out. And if I say, great job, there's nothing to do. If I have you make changes, simply reply to your original post and go from there. Sound good? Yeah, oh wait, hold on everybody. Let's listen to this real quick. We have 1 minute.
When is it due? Or perhaps those of you at this moment?
What?
What is it due?
The speech.
When it's due? It's the actual speech.
Yeah, again, I think it's the end of the month. I don't have my calendar on me, but like I said, just look at the calendar syllabus. I think it's like the 30, what is it? What 2 days?
30, the 1st and the 6th.
The 1st and the 6th. Gotcha.
31st.
Oh, the 31st.
3 days,
Yeah, okay. Oh, 3 days. 31st, 1st, 6th. Okie dokie pokies. Have a magical weekend. I look forward to seeing you Tuesday. I will write you up some information you need to know. And then have fun on your speech. Thesis. That's it.